Well, I am so excited today to talk to a new friend and who's quickly becoming one of my favorite peeps because we share a lot of things in common. We're both hardworking women and love the work that we do. Mine in more corporate America, hers in state education, but we have this other place that we love to talk about, which is creativity, what it does for the soul, how it heals the heart, how it moves us into a more fulfilled way of living. And many of you know I'm an artist and been doing this since, gosh, my late 20s. So when I find a fellow creative person who believes in the value of creativity, man, I just love to have that conversation. So that's what we're going to explore today. Kick up your feet, relax, kick back, and enjoy us sitting there talking about what creativity has done for us and how we're bringing this into the world. So, Jen, so good to have you here. Thanks for joining us today. And I'm going to pass it over to you and say, tell our listeners a little bit about who you are and what some of your passions are.
Yeah, thank you. It's a huge honor to be on this podcast. I know I've very quickly become a big fan of yours and your podcast, and likewise, just so excited to find someone that I have so much in common with, and just really understands, where my perspective on a lot of the things that we're going to talk about today, which I won't give away yet. But so a little bit about me. First, I'm a wife of 12 years and a mom of 3 kiddos. So my son, who is 8, and I have a daughter who's 4, and then another daughter who is 1. And so I've got that hat that I wear. And then when I'm not working as an educator, I love to create all manner of things, and the forms in which I do that. It's not just creating things myself, but I love talking about creativity and encouraging others to find their own creativity as well. And so some of the forms in which I do that is through my own podcast called Made to Create. And in there, the goal is really just to debunk this idea. I know we're going to talk about this in a little bit, that some people are not creative and some people are. And really, one of my core beliefs is that we are all creative in one way, shape, or form. And so part of the podcast is to kind of debunk that myth about creativity. And then also just having a chance to hear about the stories and the journeys that other creatives have had in doing whatever it is that they're doing, from hairdressers to graphic designers to I've had some creativity coaches, and just you name it. And when I'm not doing that, I'm also hosting monthly creative events for usually it's for women. Most of them tend to be moms. Most of them are moms of little ones as well, similar to my life stage. And the same thing with those events. It's really just to give those women, give those moms a break from all the to-dos and give them permission to see themselves as creative and to enjoy the process of creating. So that is me in a nutshell. So.
I love that. I love that. And I'm going to ask you this question, then I'm going to answer it first, but I'm going to buy you time, really, to be thinking how you want to answer this. But the question I want to ask is, what really started your passion for the value of creativity in your life? And then I'll share first of just, I was brought up with a lot of like productivity and achievement. That's what was celebrated. Everything from the grade A in school to working, to making money, to getting the job done, to paying off school loans, everything. It was very much go, go, go. And if it produced something valuable, that's what made it valuable. But then I hit a pretty big roadblock where I just life stopped working for me in my late 20s. A lot of anxiety, a lot of depression. And so I started working with a counselor. And I remember her saying to me, Heather, you could talk circles around me. I'm going to leave you here with a pad of paper and some coloring pencils. And I'd like you to draw what you're feeling. I'm like, ooh, you're leaving me alone with myself and my thoughts. This is alarming. And I drew some hard pictures, and that's what was some breakthrough moments for me. And then that moved me into the next probably 30 years, 20 to, almost 30 years where I started doing a lot of painting and art, and each of my paintings that I do kind of represent milestones in my life or things that I'm really working through. So I'm not a trained artist, but I
Mhm.
definitely embraced it, and I did learn, oh, you could grow in it. Just like you practice art, I didn't realize that you could grow in it. So that's a little bit of why I began to really value art. And then I did, of course, had to do the research on it,
Mhm.
the right side of the brain. And you can't heal unless you got the right side of the brain going. I'm like, that's exactly what I had experienced in my own personal healing and development.
Mhm.
And to this day, I'll sit down and draw or paint if I'm stuck or working through something, or even if I just need to find higher levels of fulfillment because of what it does to the right side of their brain. So share with us a little bit of what made you get very passionate about bringing creativity and engaging people in their creative arts.
Mm. Yeah, and I mean, there's no surprise here, but I think there's a lot of things that you said that resonated with me about your own journey, and so I can see some through lines in both of our journeys and how that passion's developed. But I think if I really look back, I think that interest and love in specifically visual arts, but
Mm,
also creativity in general has always been there.
mhm,
But I think similar to you is that there was this message, not really overtly, but kind of an underlying message that what was most valuable was what you said. I love how you said it. The productivity and the output, right? So if it
mm,
produced something,
yeah,
then it had value.
mhm,
And so I remember for a very long time, as a teenager, everyone loves to ask kids the question of, well, in 5 years, what do you want to be doing, or what do you
yeah,
see yourself doing with your life?
mhm,
And I I remember I had this really deep interest in doing interior design. I thought that just sounded like a lot of fun. I thought I could be really good at it.
mhm,
And, but, at that time, I was also kind of involved in church and ministry. And I, again, not overtly, but kind of got this message of like, well, like, what is that doing for the kingdom of God? Like,
mm,
if you're doing interior design, is that really doing anything for Jesus? And again,
mhm,
no one said that explicitly, but
mhm,
that is kind of what I came to understand. And so I took a different path.
mhm,
And part of that path, I ended up taking a drawing class in college, in community
mhm,
college. And that was like you, one of those moments where I was amazed at what I was capable of doing, capable of
mm,
making. And that was the only formal class or
mhm,
education that I had taken on anything related to visual arts. But I
mhm,
was so and not in this boastful type of way, but just amazed at wow, what I can do with a little bit of guidance and
mhm,
practice.
mhm,
And so I think that kind of set me on this road of really using specifically visual arts and crafting and things of that
mhm,
nature to as kind of a self-care, but also just personal interest type of
mm,
activity. But
mhm,
it took a very long time, and really I would say only in maybe the last 5 years, realizing that you know what, even if you don't produce anything out of it, it still has value, and
mhm,
it's still valuable to the kingdom of God. And
mhm,
there's still place for that, even if you're not making money off of it, even
mhm,
if you're not, again, producing some
mhm,
product.
mhm,
And so that is has been partially kind of my message in the last few years with Made to Create, is kind of reminding myself, but also reminding other people that it has value, even
mhm,
if you don't have to do it professionally. You don't, but you can, and even then, it
mhm,
has value, and the world needs it. It's
mm,
not just something that it's you can have the blessing to do, but it is important and it needs to be in the world.
mhm, mhm. It really does. Here's what I'm seeing too. I've done lots of retreats around this, and I'll start it
Mhm.
out with classical music and just drawing for the first 30 minutes. And of course, everyone's fidgeting for the first couple minutes. And then they're almost pretty mad at me once I turn the music off and say it's over because they just started getting in that groove. And what I've experienced with humanity is the need to be able to still do something, maybe with their hands or their mind, but it's not that left hemisphere of the brain where they're saying, I'm working out a problem or troubleshooting or writing a bill or or writing an essay or whatever it is that we are so conditioned to do that we kind of almost let the right side of our brain atrophy, and then we
Mm,
think we're not creative.
mhm.
It feels almost insidious because first of all, every human being has 2 lobes of the brain. So whenever I hear that, I go, that's absolutely impossible, but keep talking, I think really more of the question I want to ask is, what do you think blocks the creativity? You don't have to tell a kindergartner. I look at kids. There's no little kindergartner looking at me going, "I'm not creative, Mrs. Penny," or my
Mhm.
4-year-old, "I'm not creative, Miss, mom." They don't think that way. There's something that happens in the human experience, and I often say, art is attached to the heart.
Mhm.
I feel like that sometimes we have attacks on our art or our any kind of creative expression, and it really goes deep down into our heart and our psyche and our identity. But I
Mhm.
wonder if you could speak a little bit to that and just tell our listeners a little bit. What do you think are some of the barriers around us being comfortable with our creativity?
Right. Oh goodness, where to start? Okay. Well, I
Yeah,
think
big question. Sorry.
That's okay. It's a great question, and it's one that I've had to kind of evaluate myself too, and so it's
Hmm.
it's been really helpful to think through that, but I think one thing is misunderstanding what we mean by creativity.
Mm,
And so the person that says, "Well, I'm just not creative," the first wondering or inquiry I have is, "Well, what do you think creativity is?"
hmm.
Because I think a lot of times we conflate being artistic with being creative. And
Hmm.
I think there's some commonalities, but I don't think that they are that I think they can exist separate from one another. And
Hmm.
so I think that everybody is creative in one way, shape, or form. And so the
Hmm.
person who designs a beautifully organized spreadsheet is exercising their creativity, just like the
Yes.
person that is painting with a paintbrush.
Yes. Well said.
And yes, and so
Hmm.
I think it's one that we've misunderstood what creativity
Mm,
is,
hmm.
but then we've also either ourselves or, well, probably mostly, I would say, letting the outside world place value on
Mm,
what that creativity is. And so,
hmm.
just like everything that we do, it's so easy to compare ourselves
Hmm.
to what somebody else makes or how they do
Hmm.
it or how they look. And I think that that might even be part of why I'm drawn to working with moms, because I think comparison is a big challenge with moms too,
Hmm.
in
Hmm.
in the way that we look and the way that we raise our kids. And I
Hmm.
think the same thing is also true of creatives, that it's really, really easy to compare ourselves to someone else that we see as creative. And if we're
Hmm.
not producing like them, or if we aren't as successful as them in our creativity, whatever that venture is, then
Hmm.
we're not doing it right. And if we're
Hmm.
not doing it right, then maybe it doesn't have value. And so I think it's a
Hmm.
lot of that kind of negative self talk. And again, with some of those myths that we've
Mm,
developed around what creativity is and whether we deserve to engage in it.
mm. Oh, I love that. Whether we deserve
Mhm.
makes me think of a conversation I was just having today with a client, and he was talking about needing space and time in his life.
Mm.
And I said, "Well, why aren't you doing that?" And he's like, "Yeah, I know I need it. I just don't know. I'm not able to do it."
Mm.
And we both laughed because we both knew it was an excuse.
Right.
We're both
Mhm.
grown adults, fully in charge of our own calendar. And so as soon as it came out of his mouth, he knew that I was going to call him on it. So I just kind of laughed. I said, "Okay, you say you want it, but you're telling me you can't do it. So
Mhm.
what are you going to do about that?" And what it really came down to, and this is the question I asked, is I said, "Do you feel like you're worth it? Do you
Mm.
feel like you're allowed to have this space just to take care of you, not to
Right.
be productive, not to do anything else?" And we weren't even able to get to the creativity. I would have loved to say, "Would you like to try and draw for 30 minutes a day?" I mean, or listen to music or write poetry, or
Right.
could you have tried anything like that? But I just thought, wow, the bar is so challenging right now of what we can tell ourselves that we deserve, that I think
Mhm.
what I want to challenge our listeners to do is say, not only create the space for yourself daily to just breathe and relax, but what if you dared to actually create an ongoing space to create?
Right.
That I
Right.
think it would change the world.
Yeah,
I
and I think about, I might have shared this on a podcast episode that I've had before, but I
Mhm.
think there are times when our creativity has to pivot or look differently than we would like it to, or maybe it has in the
Mm.
past too.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so I think sometimes that can be a little bit scary. And
Mhm.
so, one example, when I was just a few months pregnant with our third baby, I had terrible morning sickness that was actually just all day
Mm.
sickness. And
Mm.
the idea of even just reading a book was
Mhm.
exhausting because I
Mhm.
just didn't have the energy to do literally anything at all.
Mhm.
And so I think there are times like that where, I wasn't drawing, I wasn't painting because I didn't
Mhm.
have the energy to do that. Like physically, I couldn't
Mhm.
bring myself to do it
Mhm.
because I just wasn't well. And so
Mhm.
and that was really, really hard for me because again, I wasn't producing anything. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
then in my head, I was like, well, maybe I'm not really that creative after all. Right. And so
Oh, the false beliefs creeping.
the false beliefs
Uh-huh.
definitely started to creep in. And
Mhm.
this is, mind you, after I'd been doing this, my podcast for over a year. I'd
Oh,
been holding
yeah.
all these creative events and I've
Mhm.
been preaching this message. And then all that guilt comes back because I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't even believe the things that I'm telling other people that they should be believing. But what I
Yep.
started to realize was, you know what? Maybe this is, instead of focusing on producing something, maybe this is
Mhm.
just the time to take in. Maybe this is the time to gain inspiration instead.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
that is just as valuable as me
Mhm.
producing something.
Mhm.
And so that's what I spent my time trying to focus on, is where can I find creative inspiration, right?
Mm.
And so instead of getting down on myself because I couldn't paint or draw like I used to, I was still noticing, wow, look at the colors in these flowers, or look at the
Mhm.
amazing, sunset or the clouds in the sky, and just
Mhm.
marveling at the creativity that was all around me.
Yeah.
But I definitely had that experience. You mentioned the creative atrophy, and I've
Yeah.
used that exact phrase because
Oh.
when I was in that false belief,
Mhm.
that's what I experienced, and it was
Mhm.
hard to kind of get back on track with it.
Isn't it amazing how here's what I've learned. And I wrote this book probably mostly for me, Jen.
Mhm.
So every 18 chapters in there is me working through my stuff of, and then hopefully just offering it to the world to help normalize these
Mhm.
blocks. But what I find amazing is those false beliefs come charging in our most vulnerable moments,
Yeah.
especially when we're trying to do something that we value, something we're passionate about. And then right on the heels of those false beliefs is the shame and the guilt,
Mhm.
like I shouldn't be thinking this, and I'm in the middle of coaching this, and part of where I even have to really combat that myself is just to say, I offer this not out of perfection. I offer this
Mm.
mid journey.
Yeah. Yes.
And then doing so, we're drawing back the almost the curtain to say, so here's how I struggle with creativity. I
Mhm.
remember even like I had to pivot. I love that you mentioned this. I had to pivot away from painting with kids. And I was so discouraged because here I loved it and everything, but I
Mhm.
think you know where I'm going with this.
Yep.
As soon
Absolutely.
as you get all the paints out, and I have acrylics, and so it dries quickly. As soon as you get everything out, they're up from a nap or they're running around or they've got their hands in it. And
Mhm.
I it was a really luxurious um creative outlet for me before I had kids. But after kids, it was like I had to pivot a little bit more and say, how can I get to be creative and still use my time when I've got maybe a 2-hour nap window?
Mhm.
And is it just enjoying nature? Is it just sitting there enjoying the creativity of the creator, which is getting out in nature, enjoying the creativity of an amazing writer, novelist who just lets me get lost in
Right.
a story? Even learning, I remember I pivoted over to I made jewelry. I just beaded like mad. My poor friends, they were the recipient of all my gifts. I was like, I got to do something to create. And I could feel
Yep.
that pulling on us. And how sad it is if we're living with that false belief that says, I'm not creative, or I can't create
Mhm.
what I really want. Um, Speak to that a little bit so that we can help our listeners get past some of these barriers that is keeping them stuck from creating.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it is redefining, what, again, what is creative, and what giving ourselves permission to try something different and try
Mm.
something imperfectly too.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so, it doesn't again, I'm not just creative when I'm painting or I'm
Mhm.
drawing, but when I'm cooking dinner, right? I'm engaging in
Mm.
creativity. Really, all
Yes.
that creativity, right? At the root of
Mhm.
it, it's the word create. And all that means is making something that didn't exist before. And we do
Mm.
that all day long, don't
Right.
we?
Right,
And
yeah.
so, yeah. And so, even the way that we are creating space for people, for our families, we're
Mhm.
being creative then. But aside
Mhm.
from that, and this kind of touches on that conversation you were having with that individual, is well, why are we not carving out the space? If it is
Mhm.
a matter of us just not making the time for it. Why is that happening? Is it really
Mhm.
like, the situation like when I just physically I wasn't well? Is it
Mhm.
something like that? And in which case we need to look at, well, where is a different way that we can kind of gain
Mhm.
either inspiration or the ability to do something else, maybe that
Mhm.
we weren't doing before? Or
Mhm.
is it a matter of, well, I've got too many things to do. I've got many responsibilities. Well, then that's a different conversation because
Mhm.
that's a conversation around, you know, being intentional with carving out the time because you deserve it and because it has value.
Mhm.
Just like the dishes or the
Mhm.
laundry that is piling up. Yes, of course we have to
Mhm.
do that, but carving out that time, those things that bring life to us have just as much, I think, if not more value than some of those other things that we put on ourselves and put
Mhm.
on those to-do lists. And so that's a whole different conversation in and of itself. And so that's the individual that I would want to explore with. Well, why do
Mhm.
you feel like you can't or you don't have the permission to set time aside for whatever it
Mhm.
is?
Mhm.
And so that's kind of where I would start with that person.
Yeah, well said. I write about this in my book about asking good questions. You ask good questions, you're
Mhm.
going to get good answers. And a question that is not helpful is basically, am I creative? It just
Mhm.
boxes you in, yes or no. What I love to encourage listeners to is let's just all agree that every human has the ability to create. And let's go ahead and
Mhm.
answer that with a resounding yes. And let's stop asking that question.
Yep.
Let's move on to the next question, which is how do I love creating and how do I want to make the space for it?
Right.
If we can
Yeah.
start sitting in those two questions, how do I love creating and how do I make the space for it? Here's the irony of it. We will get very creative on what it is that we need to do to create
Mhm. Mhm.
because we're
Yep.
all wired that way. But if we're still living with the false belief that I'm not really creative, no, you may not be able to sit down and paint a painting, or you may not be able to cook a meal, or you may not be able to have any interest in writing a poem. These may not be what you're creative in.
Mhm.
However, I would challenge every listener to find it. And to your point, even like I have seen very left brain people get so excited about how they created a spreadsheet.
Yep.
And I'm so grateful for that because that is not the way I'm
Mhm.
wired. And I have those people in my life and I go, that's amazing. And then I'll even comment about how they've color coded and how they've organized it. I even think about these home organization shows.
Mhm.
Stuck
Yep.
into them sometimes because I'm like, oh my gosh, they're using their creative skills to create
Right.
order in this world. So back to your original kind of earlier point of I think we're keeping a very small definition around creativity and worse, we're
Mhm.
comparing our creativity with our neighbor, which
Yep.
just all of a sudden just shuts it down. So even as we're talking, here's my clarity. We got to have we get to have much more of these true beliefs around I get to create
Mhm.
and I get to stand tall in what creating means to me.
Right.
Once we can
Absolutely.
stand tall in those true beliefs, we're not going to sit there and keep fiddling with kind of looking over at our neighbor and saying, well, I don't create like them. So therefore I must not be creative. It's
Mhm.
heartbreaking to watch, isn't it?
Yeah. And I heard somewhere recently that when we are faced with a question and there seems to be like a binary response to it. So, yes, I am creative or no, I'm not creative. If neither of those answers feel
Mm-hmm.
good to us, then that means that we're not asking the right question. Right.
Mm,
And so
mm-hmm.
to your point about, let's start with asking the right question first. And so
Mm-hmm.
again, well, I don't feel like I'm creative, but it feels really bad to say that I'm
Mm,
not. right? So
Mhm.
I don't like either of those responses because, well, maybe I'm not asking the right question. Maybe the right question is, why don't I feel creative? Instead of,
Mm.
am I creative? And
Mm.
then we can get down to the root of, well, where is this to use some of your language? Well, where is that false belief coming from?
Mhm.
And if we
Mhm.
understand where it's coming from, then we can start to understand what the truth around it is.
Mhm. Well said. Well said. Another potential block I'm noticing too, and I'll just be honest with my own life. My life got so busy and full, and I
Mhm.
was creating. I created a book. So I kept thinking, I am creating, I am creating.
Right.
But I find myself just yearning for a little bit more of a different style of creating and giving
Yeah.
myself that option to do that. And I find myself avoiding it.
Mm.
And I think, why am I avoiding it? Like I coach people through this all the time. And I don't know if it's a fear. I don't know if it's a energy level. Sometimes I think it's an energy level.
Mhm.
But I would say one of the first steps, and this is to any of my listeners who are sitting there going, oh, this just feels big. I think just slowing down and starting to ask yourself that question of what is it that I want to create? What is it that I love doing? And
Mhm.
letting that be enough, even if you just sit in that for a while, it allows you to start engaging with yourself in a new manner. And you'll be so surprised as you start to learn about who you are and what fills you up and how you like to create and be able to step into that in a way that allows you to, oh, not only feel fulfillment, but I think you offer your best self back to the people you love and you live
Oh,
with, don't
yeah.
you?
Yes. Absolutely.
When I come out of a creating session, I'm like, "And there's rainbows and unicorns everywhere, and the world is
Mhm.
one," you know?
Mhm.
When I haven't had a chance to create, I can feel that crankiness or even the cynicism or the bitterness starting to come on because I'm not engaging with that side that really nurtures me and almost parents me and
Mhm.
allows me to, well, sit down and finger paint. Let's You
Right.
don't have to be productive, Heather. You do not have to take care of the world. You do not have to carry these burdens on your shoulder, which is an adult way of thinking. I think
Mhm.
the creativity allows us to move more into our childlike posture, which is what's something we want to nurture all the way to the grave.
Right. Yeah, and I think about, to your point earlier, about the way that children create. And they don't ever sit down. I mean, at least my kids,
Mhm.
they don't make a plan for what they're going to do
Mhm.
and then analyze it every step of the way. And why am I doing this right? Or do,
Mhm.
well, but what's my friend in my third grade class going to think about this? Or, oh,
Mhm.
what, oh man, but this isn't coming out the way that I thought it was going to. So you know what? Forget it. No, they
Mhm.
just keep creating. They just keep
Mhm.
going at it.
Mhm.
And there's, I think, so much that we can learn from that, because in that process, right,
Mhm.
they are just doing it for the sheer enjoyment. It's almost,
Mhm.
it's just comes completely natural to them.
Yes.
And there's no comparison, at least not while they're
Mhm.
young, no
Mhm.
comparison between, how the kid next door is building their blocks and how they're
Mhm.
building their blocks. They're just coming up with something.
Mhm.
And I've even found myself as a parent kind of going like, I don't, you want that, is that supposed to look like a house? That doesn't look, can I help you? Can I, what if you did this a little different? It might look more like, and I just have to kind of
Yeah.
get out of their way.
Yeah.
Um, because that's how I've been taught,
Mhm.
again, about what creates value, or how
Mhm.
we perceive something as valuable.
Mhm.
And I get, kind of wrapped up in that myself. And so I have to even be
Mhm.
careful about the messages that I'm sending my own kids around that.
Mhm. Yes. Oh, well said. So what are some things you do love creating today? This in
Mhm.
this season of your life?
In this season of my life, well, I mentioned before, I love visual art. And
Mhm.
so I love drawing. I've recently gotten into watercolor, which was something that I'd never done before. I thought was really, really scary. And I look at kind of where I started with it and where I
Mhm.
am now. And I haven't taken a class or any type of
Mhm.
thing like that. It's just been experimenting with it and just kind of finding out what feels
Mhm.
really good and what's working really well. And it's been just, the exploration phase of it has been
Mhm.
really a lot of fun. And
Mm.
so that's what I've been doing most of my time. But I love cooking, and
Mm.
again, just things that I can share with other people.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
a painting that I can show somebody or share with someone, or a meal that I can make and bring people together around. Those are all
Mm.
the types of things that I love creating. And it's looked different throughout the years, but that's kind of where I am with it right now.
Oh, I love that.
Mhm.
I also love even just creating with the different seasons. I love
Mhm.
decorating my house to just almost like usher in the different seasons, and my family mercilessly teases me for my pumpkins. It's become a contest of how many pumpkins do we have, and someone gets a prize if they can figure out how many pumpkins are hidden around the house.
Oh my goodness. I love it.
But I think how we choose to show up with our creativity gets to be creative. It gets
Mhm.
to shift and change, and how we're engaging with that, I find that it's really connected to our levels of joy.
Mhm.
Hmm. How old were your kids again?
8, 4, and 1.
Oh boy, you're in the thick of it.
Yep.
Yeah. And
Yep.
those are the creative years too, where they haven't learned to compare themselves. The 8-year-old's probably starting.
Yep.
I saw it younger
Exactly.
and younger when I was teaching, but they're precious years. We can learn so much from them, can't we?
I know, and you almost wanna bottle it up and just don't not let the world kind of infuse
Yes,
there.
I
It's
know.
get its hands in it.
And then how do you keep a that creative spirit in the home? Tell me a little bit about that.
Mhm.
I know you've married a creative.
Yes. So that kinda helps. I think one of the things that I love about that too is our kids, because there's also 2 of us that are constantly creating things,
Mhm,
they have opportunities to constantly see that, but
mhm,
sometimes it takes some intentionality and
mm,
not saving that, as frustrating as that can be to, like you were talking about, start
mhm,
doing something and then,
mhm.
the kids come in and they wanna be a part of it or they wanna get their hands in it.
Yeah.
Realizing that that can still be a really valuable lesson for them because they're seeing mom and dad create.
Mhm,
And so that's not just inspiring their creativity, but
mhm,
it's also sending this really important message that you need to set time aside for that.
mhm,
And so that was kind of something that it took me a little while as a parent to learn,
mhm,
was that, again, going back to that deservedness,
mhm,
that I deserve to, that I'm allowed to, as a parent, do something for myself.
mhm,
A lot of parents struggle with that idea.
mhm,
But in addition to me deserving that, when I'm modeling that for my kids, it's telling them that, you deserve that.
mhm,
And so that's just one of the ways that we keep that alive in the house, is making sure that our kids are seeing that,
mm,
and, and letting them
mhm,
engage in it in whatever messy, imperfect way that they want to.
mhm.
Um, so, like, one of the things my son loves to do is and sometimes it drives me bananas, but he'll go into the kitchen and he's like, "I'm just gonna bake something."
Mhm.
And we're like, "Well, what are you gonna make?" "I don't know. I'm just gonna kind of figure it out." And sometimes it's a complete and utter disaster, and I've eaten things that I wish I haven't eaten. But and sometimes we have to put a stop to it because the I can see, like, the plumes of, like, flour, like,
Yes.
smoke in the kitchen. But
Yeah.
sometimes I also am really intentional about letting it happen because I
Mhm,
realize that there's value in that. And
mhm,
again, it's sending the right message that even if your cake comes out
mhm,
completely disgusting and I don't
mhm.
wanna touch it, that's okay.
Yeah.
Something happened and you were exercising your creativity while you were engaging in that.
I love that.
Mhm.
It makes me think about, something that I had to get a real strong pulse on, of creating alone and creating together.
Mhm.
For alone, I realize I need that space. I'm not really good at painting with people in the room and all this stuff.
Mhm.
And it took me a while to own that, because a lot of people wanted to start engaging. Oh, I want to come paint with you. And I'm like, I love the idea of that, but I'm
Mhm.
realizing my creativity needs that introvert solo reflective time. And oftentimes I'll even just put on either earbuds or music to just kind of get lost in that. And I can't dialogue, I can't engage,
Mhm.
I can't do that and create.
Yep.
And then I will also say, how do I enjoy creating with people? It makes me think of my 20-year-old daughter who comes home on break from college, and we'll create together, which is just doing beading time. So it's kind of
Mm.
mindless, and we kind of create together. We're talking, and before you know it, 3 or 4 hours will pass. But I've become really cognizant of what are some things that I love creating with people, And what do I love doing alone? With my
Yeah.
son, he's actually loves food. So we will pick out our favorite recipe or create our own recipe and figure it out together. And that's how we create together.
Yeah.
But I've learned that the people, the relationships that I'm in, it's really important for me to do some kind of creative thing with each other. And I guess I want to ask you to kind of speak to that a little bit, creating alone and creating with.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think you're right. I think there is an importance in recognizing, well, what are those 2 things? I love that you've even kinda narrowed it down to, like, well, what are the things I love to do with people, and what are the things
Mhm.
that when I try and do that is going to stress me out and it's
Yeah.
not going to be a good experience, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's a really valuable self-reflection.
Mhm.
And and I think it's important to realize what
Mhm.
that is. Just like, the other day, for instance, I went for a run and my son was like, "I wanna come with you." Like,
Mm.
"Not today, buddy," because I wanted and then I needed that time just kind of by myself. And so
Yeah.
there might even be some times where, there might be the same activity. So maybe today
Mhm.
I feel like, yeah, okay, I can paint with you, but
Mhm.
maybe tomorrow, no, I need that time by myself. And that's
Mhm.
okay to set that aside.
Mhm.
And some of the conversations that Cody's, my husband and I have had is making sure that we understand. So sometimes it's going to be a subtle cue and sometimes it's going to be a really explicit, hey, you know what? I really need some time to go
Yeah.
and paint, to go and, he's a musician. So, play
Mhm.
guitar.
Mhm.
And so that's been really helpful to recognize that in one another and know that there's going to be times where we're going to need each other's help in creating that space
Mhm.
so that, we're not, again, when it's one of those times that mom doesn't feel like creating
Mhm.
with you, and that's okay,
Mhm.
that that we do that. And
Mhm.
I don't think there's any guilt or shame in that. It's, my kids will do the same thing where,
Mhm.
sometimes they don't want me involved in their play,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
and sometimes they need that kind of independent
Mhm.
playtime as well. And so I think that's just kind of a human need. And
Mhm.
so looking at how we can find support for those times to
Mhm.
set them aside to be able to create for
Mhm.
ourselves. And it's
Mhm.
I think it touches on that self-care piece.
Yes.
And so yeah, absolutely.
Well said. I love that. And learn how to communicate that to the people you live with, whether it's
Mhm.
spouses or kids or other extended family member. Learn how to say, "This is me time,"
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
I value we time. So
Mhm.
this is what me time gets to look like. Here's what we time gets to look like, and it's dual. You want to
Mhm.
know what's important for them with having me time and what's important for we time. So even like I've adjusted with we time with my kiddos, what does it look like to create together on their
Mhm.
terms? Well, my son does not want to sit down and make jewelry. I'll tell you that. He did
Mhm.
go through a phase where he got really into the earrings, but I was discreetly taking him apart behind the scenes because it would have ripped holes in most women's ears.
Oh my goodness. That's
So,
great.
but I wanted to encourage it too. I'm like, of course you could put 10 beads on that earring that each weigh about a pound. Of course we
I
can.
know.
And women would love wearing that. So just letting them kind of create, like you said, and allowing them to just experiment and explore, and then recognizing when do we get to put boundaries down and say, this is my time for mom to create, and then you get to have
Mhm.
your time. Love that. Love that. Okay. Oh my goodness. I can't believe how quick this time went, Jed. We
I know.
just plowed through this. I think we could keep talking about it. As we wrap up, this is a question I'd love to ask all my listeners. What are How do you start your day? What are some of your morning rituals?
Mhm. That's funny. It's one of those things that I'm trying to get better at being consistent with.
Yeah.
And so
What, your
lately,
1-year-old doesn't understand?
no, I know, shocking, huh? I know. My morning ritual is attending to the 1-year-old usually.
Exactly. I remember those years.
Yes, but part of it is I've, looking at, well, what are some of the things that
Mhm.
the to-dos that we have
Mhm.
in our lives and kind of
Mhm.
building in some enjoyable rituals around that. And so one of those things that I've realized I really enjoy is I'm not a morning person. My kids make me be a morning person, but one way
Mm.
that I can kind of leverage that into something that I really love as a routine and a ritual is we have to take the dog out in the morning. And so using that as an opportunity to, not just, send them in the backyard, but really be intentional about, taking a walk. And that even becomes kind of the start of my creative time, because I find a lot of creativity in nature. And so as I'm out walking the dog, I'm trying to be really intentional about really seeing and noticing the creative things around me. And so I'm doing that. I'm taking in my, through my senses, the smells that I'm smelling and the way that the air feels on my skin. And so using all my senses in that. So that's one way that I'm starting my morning. And then usually it's, I'm trying to be better. I'm not consistently doing this, but I'm trying to be better about this, about also waking up a little bit earlier to kind of have some of that quiet time, because you probably know with kids come a lot of external stimuli, whether it's them or it's, they're turning on the TV or there's the arguments or things like that. And so just letting myself kind of enjoy the quiet before we start the day and before all the noise and the stimulus comes in. So that's usually what I'm working on getting better at, I will say.
Yes. Oh, it will get easier. I remember those years. Oh boy. And my kids were such morning bugs. So I was like, I guess if you can't beat them, you got to join them. And to this day, I'm such a morning person. And I love it.
I like the idea of it. It's just, I'll say that.
I hear you. Oh, well, it's been such a pleasure. Before we sign off here, what encouragement do you want to leave for our listeners?
Just recognizing that, going back to that same message, everybody is creative. And sometimes it takes a little bit intentionality to make time for it. But just recognizing, and I think you said this earlier, that a lot of times we don't take that time because we feel, we've got obligations, or we feel like, if we're going to be our best for somebody else, then we have to always be on for somebody else. But when we're taking that time, we're not only are we making or making something of value for ourselves, but for the world, for other people, but we're also, because it's helping us, we're just so much more better for the people that are around us. So that misplaced intention that we sometimes have to avoid our the things that bring us joy for the sake of other people really is not even accomplishing that. So just recognizing that and making sure that we recognize the importance of it.
I love it. And I'm going to leave our listeners with the 3 C's, because as you're talking, it just made me think about it. Our clarity around creativity is really understanding where is it that you love creating, and get clarity around that. Journal on it, talk about it, take a friend to coffee about it, talk to your spouse about it, friend, anyone. Start getting that clarity that you need around your creativity. And the confidence, of course, has to do with our true beliefs and our false beliefs. And I want to say, grab onto that true belief that says I get to be creative. And the courage, of course, has to do with action, which I would say, make an action plan for how you're going to create the space to be creative. So that's the 3 C's I'll leave our listeners with. And I will say, cheering you on. Thanks for coming, Jen. It's so fun having you.
All right. Thanks, Heather.
Thanks for joining us today. We'd love a review. Helps us out quite a bit. Wherever you are, just drop a review. And you can find out more at heatherpenny.com. Cheering you on.